The delivery truck pulled away from my driveway, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the December snow. I stood at my window, watching my 5-year-old daughter Emma press her face against the glass, her breath fogging up the pane as she searched for packages that would never come. Across town, I knew my brother's kids were tearing into boxes from Grandpa Richard, just like my sister's twins were doing 3 states over. But for Emma? Nothing. Not even a card. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When I called my father that evening, his voice was casual, almost dismissive. "Oh, I must have forgotten your address," he said, like forgetting his own daughter's home was as simple as misplacing his reading glasses. But Richard Thompson never forgot anything. The man still remembered my childhood friend's phone number from 20 years ago. He had my address memorized, had been sending me birthday cards and holiday letters to this exact house for 7 years. That's when I realized this wasn't about forgetting, this was about choosing, and my daughter, his granddaughter, hadn't been chosen. December 23rd started like any other day in our house on Maple Street. Emma bounced into the kitchen wearing her favorite reindeer pajamas, the ones with the mismatched socks she insisted made her extra Christmassy. At 5 years old, she still believed in the magic of the season, with the kind of pure faith that makes adults both nostalgic and heartbroken. She climbed onto her usual chair at our small kitchen table, swinging her legs as I poured orange juice into her Mickey Mouse cup. "Mommy, do you think Grandpa's presents will come today?" she asked, stirring her cereal with the concentration of a scientist. Madison said her grandpa sent her 3 whole boxes, and they're really big ones. Madison was Emma's best friend from preschool, and lately, every conversation seemed to revolve around what Madison's family had, did, or received. I smoothed Emma's dark curls, so much like my own at that age, and tried to keep my voice light. "We'll see, sweetheart. Grandpa lives far away, remember? Sometimes packages take longer to arrive." It wasn't entirely a lie. My father, Richard Thompson, did live far away, nearly 600 miles south in Atlanta, where he'd moved after retiring from his accounting firm. But distance had never stopped him before. Every year since Emma was born, he'd sent something. Usually late, always practical, but something. Last year, it was educational workbooks that were too advanced for a 4-year-old. The year before, it was winter clothes in the wrong size. But he'd never forgotten entirely. The morning passed with Emma's usual pre-Christmas energy. She colored pictures of Santa, asked me to read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" for the 14th time that week, and periodically ran to the front window to check for delivery trucks. Each time she came back to the living room a little more deflated, though she tried to hide it behind increasingly elaborate theories about package delays. "Maybe the reindeer are practicing flying," she suggested around noon, "and they're too busy to help the mail trucks." "Maybe," I agreed, though my stomach was starting to knot with a familiar dread. By 3 o'clock, when the Postal Service had finished their rounds and UPS had made their final delivery of the day, Emma's optimism was wavering. She sat cross-legged in front of our Christmas tree, a modest 6-footer decorated with ornaments we'd collected over the years, and stared at the small pile of wrapped gifts beneath it. Most were from me. A few from my best friend Sarah, and one from my ex-husband's mother, who still sent Emma packages despite the divorce 2 years ago. "Mommy," Emma said quietly, not looking away from the tree, "did I do something wrong?" The question hit me like ice water. I knelt beside her on the carpet, turning her small face toward mine. Her eyes, Richard's eyes, actually the same pale blue that ran through our family, were bright with unshed tears. "Emma, honey, why would you ask that?" "Madison said grandpas only forget about kids who are bad. And grandpa forgot about me." I pulled her into my lap, feeling her small body trembling slightly. Madison, I decided, needed to have a conversation with her parents about appropriate things to say to other children. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, my daughter was questioning her own worth because of my father's negligence. "You are not bad," I said firmly, tilting her chin up so she had to look at me. "You are kind and smart and funny, and you help Mommy with everything. You are perfect exactly as you are." Then why didn't Grandpa send me anything? I didn't have an answer for that, not one that a 5-year-old could understand, anyway. Because the truth was complicated and messy, and involved adult dynamics that had been building for years. The truth was that my father had always been selective with his affections, and those selections rarely included me or, by extension, my daughter. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said instead. Even grandpas. Emma seemed to accept this, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. She snuggled against my chest, and I held her there while Christmas music played softly from the radio and snow continued to fall outside our window. But inside my chest, something was hardening into a cold, sharp point of anger. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in my living room with my phone in my hand, staring at my father's contact information. Richard Thompson. Dad. A man who had raised me with the same emotional distance he maintained with everyone except my older brother Marcus and my younger sister Rebecca. They were his favorites, always had been. Marcus, the successful lawyer who lived in the right neighborhood and married the right woman. Rebecca, the teacher who'd given him his first biological grandchildren and lived close enough for regular visits. And then there was me, Jessica Morgan, formerly Jessica Thompson. The divorced single mother who'd moved away for work and stayed away by choice. The daughter who'd never quite measured up to his expectations, never quite earned his approval, never quite been worth the effort. I'd spent 32 years telling myself it didn't matter, that his favoritism was just his way, that I was better off independent, that Emma and I were fine on our own. But watching my daughter's face crumble as she realized she'd been forgotten, that changed something fundamental in me. I dialed his number. Jessica? His voice carried that familiar tone of mild surprise, as if he couldn't quite fathom why I might be calling. Is everything all right? Hi, Dad. I was just wondering about Emma's Christmas gift. She's been watching for the mail truck all week. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone trying to remember something important, but the pause of someone scrambling for an excuse. Oh, he said finally. You know, I must have misplaced your address. I meant to call and ask for it again, but the holidays have been so busy. Your mother, he caught himself. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I mean, Rebecca's been having me over for dinner, and Marcus brought the boys by last weekend. It's been hectic. Dad, I said carefully, you've been sending things to this address for 7 years. Have I? Well, you know how it is. I'm getting old, memory isn't what it used to be. But I knew better. Richard Thompson was 73, but his mind was sharp as ever. He could recite baseball statistics from 1987, remember the exact date he'd bought his first car, and tell you the middle names of all his high school teachers. He didn't forget things that mattered to him. I could give you the address again, I offered. Maybe you could send something after Christmas? Of course, though you know how things get after the holidays. Everything's so expensive, shipping takes forever. His voice trailed off, and I realized he was hoping I'd let him off the hook. That I'd make it easy for him by saying it wasn't necessary, that Emma wouldn't mind, that we understood. But I didn't say any of those things. Instead, I said, she's been asking about you, Dad. She talks about Grandpa Richard all the time. She made you a drawing at school. A picture of you and her building a snowman together. That's nice, he said, though his tone suggested it was anything but important to him. She's 5 years old, I continued. She doesn't understand why her cousins get packages, and she doesn't. She thinks she did something wrong. Well, I'm sure she'll be fine. Kids are resilient. And she has you, right? You've always been good at managing things. As if raising his granddaughter alone while working full-time and trying to give her a stable, loving home was just another item on my to-do list. As if Emma's emotional well-being was my responsibility alone, and his role as grandfather was optional. Right, I said quietly. I guess I have been good at managing things. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about patterns I'd tried not to see for most of my life. The way he'd missed my high school graduation because Marcus had a college interview that same weekend. The way he'd sent Rebecca flowers when she got her first teaching job but forgot to call when I got promoted to department manager. The way he'd driven 8 hours to attend Marcus's son's baseball games but had never once visited Emma and me in our new city. I'd always told myself it was geography, or circumstance, or just his personality. But tonight, listening to him dismiss my daughter's hurt feelings like they were an inconvenience, I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding for years. This wasn't about forgetting addresses or busy schedules or the confusion of old age. This was about Emma not being worth his effort, and by extension, neither was I. The realization should have devastated me, but instead it felt almost liberating. Like finally naming something that had been lurking in the shadows of our family dynamic for decades. He hadn't forgotten Emma's address. He'd made a choice, just like he'd been making choices about who mattered and who didn't for as long as I could remember. The only difference now was that his choices were affecting my daughter, and that changed everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Emma woke up with renewed hope. Children have this remarkable ability to reset their expectations overnight, to wake up believing that maybe today would be different. She padded into the kitchen in her bare feet, her hair sticking up in impossible directions, and immediately asked if I'd checked the mail yet. "The mailman doesn't come on Christmas Eve, remember?" I said gently, but she was already shaking her head. Madison's mom said special Christmas deliveries can come anytime, even on Christmas Eve, even really early in the morning. Madison again. I was beginning to think Madison's family lived in some alternate universe where everything worked out perfectly and grandparents never disappointed anyone. But Emma's face was so hopeful, so determined to believe that maybe Grandpa Richard would still come through, that I couldn't bring myself to crush that optimism. Instead, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I started remembering. While Emma ate her breakfast and chattered about whether Santa would know to bring extra cookies for Rudolph, I let my mind wander back through decades of similar moments. Moments when I'd waited for my father to show up, to remember, to care just a little bit more than he actually did. I was 7 the first time I really noticed it. Marcus was 9, Rebecca was 4. And we were living in the house on Elm Street that my parents had bought when they were young and optimistic about their growing family. It was Rebecca's birthday, her 4th, and my mother had spent weeks planning a princess party. Pink streamers, a castle cake she'd made from scratch, little tiaras for all the guests. But the party was scheduled for the same day as Marcus's Little League championship game. My father stood in the kitchen that morning, looking back and forth between the birthday cake and Marcus in his baseball uniform, and I could see him weighing his options. "Linda," he'd said to my mother, "I promised Marcus I'd be there. The championship only happens once." "And Rebecca only turns 4 once," my mother had replied, but there was already defeat in her voice. She knew how this would end. My father had gone to the baseball game. Marcus's team lost anyway, but that wasn't the point. The point was that when it came time to choose, my father chose Marcus. He always chose Marcus. Rebecca got her princess party, complete with my mother's strained smile and a dozen 4-year-olds running around the backyard. But when it came time to sing Happy Birthday, there was an empty chair at the head of the table where my father should have been sitting. Rebecca was too young to understand the absence, but I wasn't. That night, after all the guests had gone home and Rebecca was asleep surrounded by new dolls and dress-up clothes, I found my mother in the kitchen washing dishes with mechanical precision. "Why didn't Daddy stay for the party?" I asked. She paused, her hands still in the soapy water, and for a moment I thought she might tell me the truth. But then she smiled that same strained smile she'd worn all day and said, "Daddy had something very important to do. He felt terrible about missing Rebecca's party." But he hadn't felt terrible. Even at 7, I could tell the difference between actual regret and polite obligation. He'd felt inconvenienced, maybe, but not terrible. That was the beginning of my education in Richard Thompson's hierarchy of importance. Marcus at the top, always. Rebecca in the middle, protected by her status as the baby and her ability to charm everyone around her. And me somewhere near the bottom, reliable enough to be overlooked, never problematic enough to demand attention. By the time I was 10, I'd learned not to expect him at my school plays. Marcus had football games, and football games were more important than 4th-grade productions of Charlotte's Web. By 12, I'd stopped asking him to help with my science fair projects. He was always too busy helping Marcus with his algebra, or teaching Rebecca how to ride her bike. The pattern was so consistent that I started building my life around it. I became self-sufficient not by choice but by necessity. I learned to do my own homework, solve my own problems, celebrate my own victories. When I made honor roll 3 semesters in a row, I didn't bother mentioning it at dinner. When I got into the National Honor Society, I signed my own permission slip and attended the ceremony alone. My mother noticed, I think, but she was caught in her own complex dance with my father's attention. She compensated for his neglect by being overly involved in everything, hovering and fussing, and trying to fill the space he left empty. But there's only so much one parent can do when the other parent has essentially opted out of half his children's lives. The worst part wasn't the big moments, the missed games or forgotten birthdays. The worst part was the daily, almost casual way he made it clear that my thoughts, feelings, and experiences mattered less than Marcus's, and sometimes even less than Rebecca's. I remember being 14 and coming home excited about making varsity soccer as a freshman. It was a big deal. Only 3 freshmen had made the team, and I was the only girl. I rushed into the kitchen where my father was reading the newspaper and Marcus was complaining about his chemistry teacher. "Dad, guess what?" I started, but he held up a hand without looking at me. "Hold on, Jess. Marcus is talking." Marcus was talking about how unfair it was that his teacher expected him to actually show up for lab sessions. This was apparently more pressing than my athletic achievement. I stood there for 5 minutes, listening to my father offer sympathy and advice about a problem that Marcus had entirely created for himself. When there was finally a break in the conversation, I tried again. "I made varsity soccer," I announced. "That's nice, honey," my father said, already turning back to Marcus. "Now about that chemistry grade." "That's nice, honey." 4 words that somehow managed to dismiss months of training, hours of tryouts, and an accomplishment that meant everything to me. 4 words that made it clear my success was pleasant background noise in the important business of managing Marcus's life. I went to my room and cried that night, not because I was sad, but because I was angry. Angry at myself for still expecting more from him. Angry at Marcus for being so effortlessly important. Angry at the whole situation that seemed to have been decided before I was even old enough to understand the rules. The pattern continued through high school, college, and into my adult life. When I graduated summa cum laude from college, my father sent a card that said congratulations and nothing else. When Marcus barely graduated with a C average, my father threw him a party and gave a speech about perseverance and character. When I got my first real job at 22, managing a team of 15 people, my father's response was, "That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age. Are you sure you're ready for it?" When Marcus got his first job as a junior associate at a law firm where his girlfriend's father was a partner, my father called everyone he knew to brag about his son, the lawyer. When I bought my first house at 25, saving for 3 years to make the down payment and researching every aspect of the mortgage process, my father visited once and spent the entire time pointing out things that needed to be fixed. When Marcus bought his house 2 years later, with money borrowed from our parents, my father spent weeks helping him move and fix things up. The most painful part was how normalized it all became. My mother stopped trying to point out the inequality. Rebecca, protected by her position as the favorite daughter, never seemed to notice that I was being treated differently. Marcus actively benefited from the arrangement, so he certainly wasn't going to question it, and I learned to stop expecting anything different. I got married at 28 to David Morgan, a kind man who noticed the family dynamic immediately and couldn't understand why I tolerated it. "Your father treats you like you're invisible," he said after our first Christmas together as a married couple, when my father had spent the entire day asking Marcus for career advice and Rebecca for cooking tips while barely acknowledging my presence. "That's just how he is," I'd said, because it was easier than admitting how much it still hurt. David tried to intervene a few times, making pointed comments about my accomplishments or directly asking my father questions about my work. But my father had perfected the art of polite deflection, and David eventually gave up trying to force a connection that clearly wasn't wanted. When Emma was born, I felt a surge of hope that maybe becoming a grandfather would change something in my father. Maybe having a grandchild would give us a new way to connect, a neutral territory where we could build something positive. For a brief moment, it seemed like it might work. He flew up to meet Emma when she was 2 weeks old, holding her carefully and making the appropriate grandfatherly noises. He even took pictures, which he sent to Marcus and Rebecca with obvious pride. But as Emma grew older, the old patterns reasserted themselves. Marcus had 2 sons, Rebecca had twins, and suddenly Emma was just one of 5 grandchildren, competing for attention from a man who had never been particularly generous with his affections. Marcus's boys got fishing trips and baseball games. Rebecca's twins got special visits and elaborate birthday gifts. Emma got forgotten addresses, and the suggestion that maybe she should just be grateful for what she had. The worst part was watching Emma try to understand why her cousins had relationships with Grandpa Richard that she didn't. She'd see pictures on social media of him at their birthday parties, their school events, their soccer games. She'd ask innocent questions about why Grandpa Richard lived so far away from us but so close to Uncle Marcus, why he visited Aunt Rebecca every month, but only called us on major holidays. I found myself making excuses that sounded exactly like the ones my mother had made 30 years earlier. Grandpa's very busy, sweetheart. He loves you very much, but he has a lot of people to take care of. Empty words that felt like betrayal even as I spoke them. Now sitting in my kitchen on Christmas Eve morning, watching Emma maintain her faith that maybe today would be different, I realized I was perpetuating the same cycle that had shaped my entire childhood. I was teaching my daughter to accept less, to make excuses for people who couldn't be bothered to prioritize her, to believe that love came with conditions and hierarchies. Emma finished her cereal and skipped off to play with her toys, humming a Christmas song under her breath. She was still hopeful, still believing that Grandpa Richard might surprise her, but I wasn't hopeful anymore. I was furious. Because this wasn't just about Emma being forgotten. This was about 32 years of being systematically devalued by a man who was supposed to love me unconditionally. This was about raising a daughter who might grow up believing she wasn't worth consistent love and attention, just like I had. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't willing to accept it. I reached for my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. If my father had truly forgotten Emma's address, then maybe it was time to remind him exactly who he was forgetting. And maybe it was time to remind myself that I didn't have to keep making excuses for him. Emma deserved better, and honestly, so did I. I started with social media, which felt simultaneously petty and necessary. While Emma napped on Christmas Eve afternoon, exhausted from her morning of hopeful energy, I sat at my laptop and began scrolling through my father's Facebook page for the first time in months. What I found was a carefully curated gallery of grandfather pride that completely erased Emma's existence. Photo after photo of Richard Thompson with Marcus's boys, teaching 8-year-old Tyler how to fish, cheering at 10-year-old Connor's basketball game, building a treehouse in Marcus's backyard. The captions were full of grandfather enthusiasm. My grandson Tyler caught his first base today. So proud of Connor for making the All-Star team. Nothing better than quality time with these amazing boys? Then there were the pictures with Rebecca's twins, 6-year-old Madison and Sophia. My father at their dance recital, beaming in the front row. A photo of him helping them plant flowers in Rebecca's garden. Another of him reading them bedtime stories during one of his frequent visits. My granddaughters are the most talented dancers in their class, teaching the twins about responsibility in the garden. These little angels make Grandpa's heart full. I scrolled back 3 years, looking for any mention of Emma. Any photo, any comment, any acknowledgement that he had a 5th grandchild. Finally, I found one picture from Emma's 3rd birthday, a group family photo from Marcus's wedding where Emma happened to be visible in the background. The caption read, "Great family celebration with my boys and girls. No names, no specific mention of Emma, just generic family happiness." That was it. One accidental inclusion in 3 years of social media grandfather performance. But what made it worse were the dates. The fishing trip with Tyler had happened 2 months ago, just a 4-hour drive from where Emma and I lived. He'd driven right past our exit on the highway to get there. The dance recital was last month. He'd flown from Atlanta to Chicago to see Rebecca's girls perform, a trip that would have cost more than a simple package delivery to our house. My father wasn't too old, too busy, or too forgetful to be an active grandfather. He was too selective. I screenshot the fishing photos and saved them to my phone, though I wasn't sure why. Evidence, maybe, of what intentional grandfather love looked like when he chose to show it. Next, I called Rebecca. My sister and I had a complicated relationship. Not hostile exactly, but strained by years of her being unconsciously favored and me being unconsciously overlooked. She was a good person, fundamentally kind, but she'd never had to question whether she was valued by our father because the answer was always obvious. "Jess!" Rebecca's voice was bright with holiday cheer when she answered. "Merry Christmas Eve! How are you and Emma doing?" "We're good," I said, settling into my kitchen chair. "Listen, I have a weird question. Has Dad mentioned anything to you about forgetting my address?" There was a pause. "Your address? Why would he forget your address?" "He didn't send Emma anything for Christmas this year. When I called him about it, he said he'd forgotten where I live and couldn't remember how to reach me." Rebecca's voice trailed off. "That doesn't sound right. He was just here last weekend helping me wrap presents for the twins. He had his little notebook where he keeps all the addresses and phone numbers. He's had that thing for years." My stomach tightened. "His notebook?" "Yeah, the black leather one. He writes everything down because he says he doesn't trust computers. All the addresses, birthdays, anniversary dates. He's really organized about it, actually. Almost obsessive." "And my address is in there?" "Well, I assume so. I mean, he's been sending you things for years, right? Birthday cards and stuff?" "Right," I said slowly. "Birthday cards and stuff." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her brain working through the implications. My sister wasn't naive. She just usually chose not to look too closely at things that might complicate her worldview. "Maybe he misplaced it this time," she offered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe. Or maybe he just didn't think Emma was worth the effort this year." "Jess!" Rebecca's tone shifted to that careful, diplomatic voice she used when she wanted to avoid conflict. "You know Dad loves Emma. He talks about all the grandkids all the time." "Does he? What does he say about Emma specifically?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, he mentions that you're doing a good job raising her, that she's smart. He's proud of how independent you are." Proud of how independent I was. The same independence that had been forced on me by 32 years of his neglect, now twisted into something praiseworthy. It was almost impressive, the way he'd reframed his parental failure as my personal strength. "When was the last time he visited Emma?" I asked. Rebecca started, then stopped. "I don't know. When was the last time he visited you?" "Almost 2 years ago. He came for a weekend when Emma was 3. He spent most of the time working on his laptop and complaining about the flight. But he sees Tyler and Connor at least once a month, and he's here with the twins every few weeks." "I know." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Rebecca was finally seeing what I'd been living with for years, and I could tell she didn't like how it looked. "Maybe you should talk to Marcus," she said finally. "Maybe Dad said something to him about why he didn't send Emma anything this year." "Good idea," I said, though I doubted Marcus would have any insights that would make me feel better. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a while, debating whether to call my brother. Marcus and I had never been particularly close, partly because of the age difference, and partly because he'd grown up in a completely different family than I had. Where I'd learned to expect disappointment, Marcus had learned to expect support. Where I'd become fiercely independent, Marcus had become comfortable depending on others, particularly our father. But Emma was sleeping, the house was quiet, and I needed answers. Marcus picked up on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Jess, what's up? Kind of a busy day here with the boys and all the Christmas prep. I'll be quick. Did Dad mention anything to you about Emma's Christmas gift this year?" "Emma's what? Oh, right, Christmas presents. I don't know, did he send her something?" "No, he didn't. That's why I'm calling. He told me he forgot my address." Marcus laughed, which was not the response I'd been expecting. "Forgot your address? Dad doesn't forget anything. He still remembers my dorm room number from college." That's what I thought. So why wouldn't he send Emma anything? "I don't know, maybe he was busy? He's been helping me out with some legal stuff for my practice. And he spent a lot of time here last month when Tyler was sick. Plus, Rebecca had some drama with the twins' school that he helped sort out." His voice continued, but I'd stopped listening after he was busy. Busy helping Marcus with his law practice. Busy taking care of Tyler when he was sick. busy solving Rebecca's problems with her daughter's school. Too busy, apparently, to buy a Christmas gift for his 5th grandchild. "Marcus," I interrupted, "when was the last time Dad asked you about Emma? Like, specifically asked how she was doing, what she was interested in, how school was going?" I don't really remember specific conversations like that. You know, Dad, he's not really a details guy when it comes to emotional stuff. But that wasn't true, and Marcus had to know it. Our father was absolutely a details guy when it came to the people he cared about. He knew Tyler's batting average, Connor's favorite video games, and the names of all of Rebecca's twins' teachers. He remembered Marcus's law school graduation date, Rebecca's wedding anniversary, and the exact day Marcus had bought his first house. He just didn't bother remembering those details about Emma, or me. "Has he ever mentioned feeling like Emma doesn't know him very well?" I pressed. "Like maybe he's not sure how to connect with her because we live so far away?" "No, nothing like that. But honestly, Jess, we don't really talk about your situation that much. Dad's more focused on what's happening with the kids he sees regularly." Your situation. As if being a single mother raising his granddaughter was some kind of lifestyle choice rather than a family relationship that deserved his attention. "Right," I said. "Well, thanks for the honesty. Look, maybe you're reading too much into this. Dad's getting older, and Christmas is stressful. I'm sure he just got overwhelmed with everything and forgot to place an order or whatever. It's not personal." But it was personal. Everything about this was personal. The fact that he'd remembered to send elaborate gifts to 4 other grandchildren, but somehow forgot about Emma. The fact that he'd maintained detailed records of everyone else's lives but couldn't be bothered to keep track of mine. The fact that Marcus could casually dismiss Emma's disappointment as an understandable oversight while expecting me to be grateful for whatever minimal effort our father chose to make. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in my living room and looked around at the life I'd built for Emma and myself. It was a good life, small but comfortable, full of love and laughter and traditions we'd created together. Emma was happy, well-adjusted, and surrounded by people who adored her. My friend Sarah, who treated her like a niece, my coworkers who always asked about her latest adventures, even my ex-husband's mother who sent gifts and cards despite having no obligation to stay connected to us. Emma had love in her life. She had people who prioritized her, who remembered her, who made space for her in their hearts and schedules. But none of those people was her grandfather, and that absence was starting to affect her in ways I couldn't ignore. That evening, while Emma played with her toys in the living room, I found myself Googling things I'd never thought to research before. Grandparent favoritism effects on children. How to handle family rejection of child. Protecting children from toxic grandparents. The articles I found were both validating and heartbreaking. Studies about how children as young as 5 could recognize when they were being treated differently by extended family members. Research showing that kids who experienced favoritism from grandparents often struggled with self-worth and attachment issues later in life. Personal stories from adults who'd grown up knowing they were the forgotten grandchildren, and how it had shaped their relationships with family and authority figures. One article in particular stuck with me. It was written by a psychologist who specialized in family dynamics, and she made a point that felt like it had been written specifically for my situation. Children don't naturally assume they deserve less love than their cousins. That's a learned behavior, taught by adults who consistently demonstrate that some children matter more than others. I closed my laptop and went to check on Emma, who was having an elaborate tea party with her stuffed animals. She'd arranged them all in a circle, given them each a plastic cup and saucer, and was serving imaginary cookies while maintaining a steady stream of polite conversation. "And how are your children doing, Mrs. Elephant?" she asked her gray stuffed elephant in a perfect imitation of adult social interaction. "Oh, that's wonderful that they're all healthy and happy. My children are doing very well too, thank you for asking." She was role-playing the kind of caring, attentive relationships she observed in the world around her. The kind of relationship she thought she had with her grandfather, because I'd never told her otherwise. The kind of relationship she deserved to have, but didn't. I knelt down beside her on the carpet. "Emma, sweetheart, can I ask you something?" She looked up from her tea party, her face bright with the joy of imaginative play. "Sure, Mommy. Do you want to join my tea party? Mr. Bear needs someone to talk to. He's feeling a little sad today." Why is Mr. Bear feeling sad? Emma considered this seriously, adjusting the small plastic cup in front of her brown teddy bear. He's sad because his family lives far away and he doesn't get to see them very much. But I told him that's okay, because the family he lives with now loves him very much, and that's what really matters. I felt something crack open in my chest. Emma was already developing coping mechanisms for abandonment, already learning to rationalize why some people in her life didn't prioritize her. At 5 years old, she was becoming an expert at making excuses for adults who should know better. "You're right," I said, reaching over to straighten Mr. Bear's tiny hat. "The family who loves you every day is definitely what matters most." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. Emma deserved to have a grandfather who loved her every day, not one who treated her like an afterthought. She deserved to feel valued by all the adults in her life, not just the ones who happen to live close by or share her daily routine. And I deserved to stop pretending that my father's neglect was acceptable just because it was consistent. That night, after Emma was asleep, I made a decision. I was going to stop making excuses for Richard Thompson's behavior and start demanding better. Not just for Emma, but for myself. I was 32 years old, and I'd spent most of my life accommodating a man who couldn't be bothered to show up for the people who needed him most. Tomorrow was Christmas. Emma would wake up excited about the presents under our tree, and she'd probably ask one more time if maybe Grandpa's package had arrived overnight. And I would have to decide whether to keep protecting my father's feelings by making excuses for his behavior, or start protecting my daughter's feelings by being honest about what was happening. For the first time in my life, the choice felt obvious. Christmas morning arrived with Emma's excited whisper in my ear at 6:47 a.m. "Mommy, it's Christmas. Can we see what Santa brought?" I opened my eyes to find her face inches from mine, her dark hair messy from sleep, but her eyes bright with anticipation. She was wearing her special Christmas pajamas, red flannel with white snowflakes that we'd picked out together in November. For a moment, I let myself forget about my father's neglect and focus entirely on her joy. "Let's go see," I whispered back, and she bounded out of bed like a spring had been released. The living room looked magical in the early morning light filtering through our sheer curtains. Our modest tree twinkled with white lights, and the presents underneath seemed to glow with promise. Emma approached them with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space, her hands clasped behind her back as she examined each wrapped package. "This one has my name," she announced, picking up a medium-sized box wrapped in silver paper. "And this one! And this one too!" She began opening gifts with the methodical excitement that only children can master, savoring each moment while simultaneously eager to move to the next surprise. A new art set from me, which made her gasp with delight. A puzzle of horses from Sarah. A book about a brave little girl from my ex-mother-in-law, Carol, who still insisted on being called Grandma Carol despite the divorce. With each gift, Emma grew more animated, more grateful, more purely happy. She hugged each present as she opened it, immediately planning how she would use her new art supplies, or when she would start reading her new book. The pile of wrapping paper grew around her like colorful snow, and she laughed as she tried to gather it all up. But I noticed her eyes occasionally drifting toward the door, toward the window, toward anywhere a last-minute delivery might appear. Even in the midst of her Christmas joy, part of her was still waiting for Grandpa Richard to remember her. After we'd finished with presents and eaten the special Christmas morning pancakes that had become our tradition, Emma settled on the floor with her new art set, carefully arranging the colored pencils in rainbow order. I was cleaning up the kitchen when my phone rang. "Merry Christmas!" Rebecca's voice was cheerful but slightly strained. "How's your morning going?" "Good," I said, glancing into the living room where Emma was completely absorbed in her drawing. Emma loved everything. She's been working on some masterpiece for the last hour. "That's wonderful. Listen, I wanted to call because, well, something happened here this morning that I think you should know about." I set down the dish I was washing. "What kind of something?" "Dad's here, obviously, for Christmas morning with the twins. And this morning, when we were opening presents, Madison asked him why Emma didn't get anything this year." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did he say?" "That's the thing. At first he just kind of brushed it off, said something about how hard it is to shop for kids you don't see very often. But Madison kept pressing. You know how 6-year-olds are when they get an idea in their heads? She wanted to know why he sees Tyler and Connor all the time but never visits Emma. And? Rebecca's voice dropped. He said, God, Jess, I can't believe I'm telling you this. He said that some families require more attention than others, and that Jessica has always been good at handling things on her own. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He said that in front of Madison? Yes, and Sophia heard it too. They both started asking more questions about why some cousins get more attention than others. And David, you remember my husband David, he got really uncomfortable with the whole conversation. He started asking Dad directly about when he'd last visited you and Emma. What did Dad say to that? He got defensive. Started talking about how expensive travel is, how busy his schedule gets, how he can't be expected to maintain the same relationship with grandchildren who live so far away. But then David pointed out that Tyler and Connor live 4 hours away from Atlanta, and you live 6 hours away. It's not like you're on the other side of the country. I closed my eyes, trying to process this. My father had essentially admitted, in front of 2 6-year-old girls, that he considered my family less worthy of his time and attention. He'd made his favoritism explicit, turned it into a policy he felt comfortable defending. How did the conversation end? I asked. Badly. David said something about how all the grandchildren should be treated equally, and Dad said that life isn't equal, and that some people understand that better than others. Then he made some comment about how Jessica never complains about these things, so obviously she doesn't think it's a problem. I had to sit down. The fact that my years of silent acceptance had been interpreted as agreement, that my refusal to make waves had been used as evidence that his behavior was acceptable, it was almost too much to process. Rebecca, I said carefully, what do you think about all this? There was a long pause. I think I've been willfully blind to something that's been going on for a really long time. And I think Madison and Sophia are going to have some difficult questions about why their cousin gets treated differently than they do. Are you going to answer those questions honestly? I don't know how to answer them at all. What am I supposed to say? That Grandpa has favorites and Emma isn't one of them? That some grandchildren matter more than others? These are 6-year-old girls, Jess. They think love is supposed to be equal and fair. It is supposed to be equal and fair, I said quietly. I know that, you know that. But Dad obviously doesn't see it that way, and I don't know how to explain his perspective without making him sound like what he is? Another pause. Yeah, like what he is. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the Christmas decorations Emma and I had put up together. Paper snowflakes she'd cut out at school, construction paper angels with cotton ball halos, a felt advent calendar we'd been filling with small treats all month. Evidence of the Christmas magic we'd created together, just the two of us. But underneath that magic was the persistent ache of Emma's confusion about why she wasn't important enough for her grandfather to remember. And now I knew that her confusion was being noticed by her cousins, that even 6-year-olds could see the inequality in how she was being treated. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. Hey, so Rebecca called me about some drama at her house this morning, he said without preamble. Something about Dad and Christmas presents? He didn't send Emma anything for Christmas, I said. When her cousins asked why, he basically said, our family doesn't require as much attention as yours and Rebecca's. Look, I don't know all the details of what happened, but maybe you're making this into more of a thing than it needs to be. Dad's old-fashioned about some stuff. He probably just figures that boys need more guidance, and since Rebecca's closer geographically— Marcus, I interrupted, he told 2 6-year-old girls that some families matter more than others. Did he say it exactly like that? Does it matter how he said it? The message was clear enough that children understood it. Marcus sighed. Dad's not perfect, okay? But he's not malicious either. Maybe he just relates better to the kids he sees more often. That's not necessarily favoritism, it's just familiarity. I could feel my patience evaporating. When was the last time he made an effort to become familiar with Emma? I don't know, Jess, but maybe if you made more of an effort to bring her around, to include Dad in her life. Include him? Marcus, I've invited him to visit dozens of times. I've sent him pictures and videos of every milestone in Emma's life. I've called him on holidays and birthdays and random weekends just to let Emma talk to him. What more am I supposed to do? I'm just saying that relationships go both ways. Maybe Dad feels like you don't really want him involved. Based on what? Based on my desperate attempts to get him to pay attention to his granddaughter? Based on the fact that I keep trying despite getting nothing back? Based on the fact that you moved 6 hours away and never really made an effort to stay connected to the family? I felt like I'd been slapped. I moved away for work, Marcus. I was 25 years old and trying to build a career, and I've been trying to stay connected ever since, but connection requires effort from both sides. Look, I'm not trying to start a fight here. I'm just saying that maybe this whole situation isn't as black and white as you're making it out to be. But it was black and white. It was as simple as a grandfather who remembered 4 grandchildren and forgot 1. It was as basic as love that came with conditions and favorites, and carefully calculated distributions of attention. After Marcus and I hung up, the conversation ending with mutual frustration and no resolution, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. My family wasn't going to change. They weren't going to suddenly recognize the inequality, apologize for the years of neglect, or start treating Emma with the same consideration they showed the other grandchildren. They were comfortable with the status quo because it worked for them. Marcus benefited from being the favorite son. Rebecca enjoyed her position as the cherished daughter, who lived close enough for regular visits. My father got to be the devoted grandfather to 4 children, while expending minimal effort on the 5th. The only person who wasn't comfortable with this arrangement was me, and the only person who was being hurt by it was Emma. That afternoon, while Emma napped, I found myself doing something I'd never done before. I started making a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a comprehensive record of every time my father had chosen someone else over Emma. Every missed opportunity. Every moment when he could have shown up and didn't. Emma's birth announcement. He called 3 days later, during his lunch break, and talked for 5 minutes. Emma's first steps, I sent a video. He responded 2 weeks later with, "Nice." Emma's first day of kindergarten. I sent pictures, no response at all. Emma's birthday parties, never attended one. Never sent a gift early enough to arrive on time. Emma's preschool graduation, I invited him. He said he'd try to make it but didn't want to commit to the flight. Never booked a ticket. Emma's first soccer game. I called him afterward to tell him how well she'd played. He was at Connor's baseball practice and couldn't really talk. The list went on for 3 pages. 3 pages of documentation that proved what I'd always known but never wanted to acknowledge. My father had systematically excluded Emma from his definition of family priorities. But I also made another list. A list of all the ways Emma was loved, supported, and celebrated by the people who chose to be present in her life. Sarah, who never missed a birthday or a school event. Carol, my ex-mother-in-law, who still considered Emma her granddaughter and treated her accordingly. My co-workers, who asked about Emma's latest adventures and remembered her favorite things. The neighbors who watched her grow up and celebrated her milestones. Emma was surrounded by love. She just wasn't getting it from the person who should have been her most devoted champion. That evening, as we were getting ready for bed, Emma looked up at me with serious eyes and asked, "Mommy, do you think Grandpa Richard forgot about me because I did something wrong?" I knelt down so we were at eye level, my heart breaking at the question she'd been carrying around for days. "Emma, sweetheart, you have never done anything wrong. Grandpa Richard's choices have nothing to do with who you are or how wonderful you are. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense, even to other adults. But why would he forget about me if I didn't do anything wrong?" I looked at my daughter, this bright, loving, curious little person who deserved so much better than the confusion and self-doubt that my father's neglect was creating, and made a decision. "You know what, baby? I don't think he forgot about you at all. I think he made a choice, and it wasn't a very good choice. But that tells us something about him, not about you." Emma considered this with the seriousness of a much older child. "So I'm not in trouble?" "You are absolutely not in trouble. You are perfect exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing an amazing little girl." She seemed satisfied with this answer, at least for now. But as I tucked her into bed and kissed her goodnight, I knew this conversation was just the beginning. Emma was going to keep asking questions about why her grandfather treated her differently than her cousins. She was going to notice the inequality more and more as she got older. And I was going to have to decide whether to keep making excuses for him, or to start protecting her from his indifference. The choice, I realized, had already been made. I just needed to figure out how to implement it. The day after Christmas, while Emma was at Sarah's house having a play date with Sarah's nephew who was visiting for the holidays, I did something I'd never done before in my 32 years of life. I called my father with the specific intention of confronting him, not asking for an explanation, not seeking reassurance, not hoping for an apology that would never come. I was calling to let him know that his behavior toward Emma was unacceptable and that things were going to change. My hands were surprisingly steady as I dialed his number. I'd spent the previous evening rehearsing what I wanted to say, writing down key points so I wouldn't get derailed by his inevitable deflections and dismissals. This wasn't going to be an emotional conversation where he could make me feel like I was being unreasonable. This was going to be a factual presentation of his choices and their consequences. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying that familiar tone of mild annoyance that suggested I was interrupting something more important. "Jessica? Is everything all right? It's unusual for you to call 2 days in a row." "Everything's fine, Dad. I wanted to talk to you about Emma's Christmas gift. Or rather, the lack of one." "Oh, that. Yes, I meant to explain about that. You see, with all the holiday preparations and helping Rebecca with the twins' school situation, I simply ran out of time to coordinate shipping to your area. You know how unreliable the postal service can be during the holidays." His lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired the craftsmanship, but I was ready for it. "Dad, Rebecca told me about your conversation yesterday morning, about how some families require more attention than others, and how I've always been good at handling things on my own." There was a pause. Not the pause of someone who'd been caught in a lie, but the pause of someone recalibrating their approach. "Rebecca tends to exaggerate things," he said finally. "She gets emotional during the holidays and sometimes misinterprets casual comments." "So you didn't tell Madison and Sophia that some grandchildren deserve more attention than others?" "I may have mentioned that different families have different needs. That's hardly controversial, Jessica. You've always been remarkably independent, even as a child. You've never needed the kind of guidance and support that Marcus has required, or the hands-on help that Rebecca appreciates with the twins." There it was again, my forced independence reframed as a character strength that justified his neglect. The circular logic that had trapped me for years. I was self-sufficient because he'd never helped me. And because I was self-sufficient, he didn't need to help me. "What about Emma?" I asked. "She's 5 years old. What kind of guidance and support does she need that you're not providing?" "Emma has you. You're an excellent mother, and you've created a stable home for her. She doesn't need additional complications in her life." Additional complications. He was describing his own presence in his granddaughter's life as a complication that might disrupt our stability. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "Dad, Emma asks me constantly why you never visit her, why you don't call her, why her cousins get presents and attention and experiences with you that she doesn't get. How am I supposed to explain to a 5-year-old that her grandfather considers his relationship with her a complication?" "You're being dramatic, Jessica. Emma is a bright child. She understands that different families have different dynamics." "She's 5 years old. She doesn't understand family dynamics. She understands that Tyler gets fishing trips, and Connor gets baseball games, and Madison and Sophia get bedtime stories, but she gets nothing. She understands that every other grandchild in this family matters enough for you to remember their addresses, but somehow you forgot hers. Look, if you're unhappy with the current arrangement, perhaps we should discuss what you think would be more appropriate. I'm not opposed to sending Emma something for her birthday this year, assuming you can provide clear guidance about what she might like." The casual dismissal in his voice, as if Emma's emotional well-being was a minor scheduling issue that could be resolved with better communication on my part, finally broke through the careful control I'd been maintaining. "This isn't about birthday presents, Dad. This is about the fact that you've spent 5 years treating your granddaughter like she's invisible, while showering attention on her cousins. This is about Emma asking me if she did something wrong to make you forget about her." "Emma said that?" For the first time in the conversation, his voice carried something that might have been concern, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook with a moment of grandfather panic. "Yes, she said that. Because that's what children do when the adults in their lives treat them inconsistently. They assume they're at fault. Well, perhaps you should explain to her that geography plays a role in these relationships. It's simply easier to maintain close connections with grandchildren who live nearby. Tyler and Connor live 4 hours away from you. Emma lives 6 hours away. 2 hours of additional driving doesn't explain why you've been to 12 of Tyler's baseball games this year and 0 of Emma's soccer games. How do you know how many baseball games I've attended? I had him. The fact that he'd automatically defended the number rather than questioning my knowledge of it proved that he knew exactly how much time and attention he was giving to each grandchild. This wasn't about forgetting or geography or being overwhelmed by the holidays. This was about deliberate choices. I know because you post about it on Facebook, Dad. Pictures of you cheering in the stands, captions about how proud you are of Tyler's athletic achievements. Just like I know about the dance recitals for Rebecca's girls, and the treehouse you built in Marcus's backyard, and the weekend trips you take with Connor to the Children's Museum. The silence on his end was longer this time. I could practically hear him trying to figure out how to explain away the evidence of his favoritism. Social media doesn't tell the whole story, he said finally. No, it doesn't. It doesn't show the phone calls Emma doesn't get, or the birthday cards that arrive 3 weeks late, or the school events you've never bothered to ask about. It doesn't show my daughter trying to understand why she's not worth the same effort you put into relationships with her cousins. Jessica, I think you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment here. Emma is a perfectly happy child with a loving mother and a stable home. She needs her grandfather, I interrupted. She needs to know that she matters to you, that you think about her, that you care about her life and her feelings and her experiences. And if you can't provide that, then I need you to stop pretending that you care about her at all. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that half-hearted, inconsistent attention is worse than no attention at all. I'm saying that if Emma isn't important enough for you to remember her address, then maybe you shouldn't have her address at all. You're talking about cutting off contact over a Christmas present? I'm talking about protecting my daughter from the kind of emotional neglect that you've been subjecting her to for 5 years. And it's not about a Christmas present, Dad. It's about a pattern of behavior that tells a little girl she doesn't matter as much as other people. I think you're overreacting. And I think you're underreacting. I think you've been treating Emma like a second-class grandchild for so long that you've convinced yourself it's normal. But it's not normal, and it's not acceptable, and I'm not going to let it continue. What do you want from me, Jessica? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized he was genuinely asking. Not rhetorically, not defensively, but as if he truly didn't understand what kind of relationship I expected him to have with Emma. I want you to treat her like you treat Tyler and Connor and Madison and Sophia. I want you to call her on her birthday and remember what grade she's in, and ask about her friends and her interests. I want you to visit her occasionally or invite her to visit you. I want you to send her Christmas presents that arrive on time and birthday cards that aren't afterthoughts. I want you to care about her life the same way you care about her cousins' lives. And if I can't provide that level of involvement, the way he said involvement, like it was an unreasonable burden rather than basic grandfather responsibilities, told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to end. Then I want you to be honest about that. Stop pretending that you forgot my address or that geography is the issue. Stop making excuses that teach Emma to accept less than she deserves. If you're not willing to be an active, caring grandfather to her, then just admit it. I think perhaps we should revisit this conversation after the holidays when emotions aren't running so high. My emotions aren't running high, Dad. My expectations are just finally catching up with reality. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. The conversation had confirmed what I'd suspected for a long time. My father wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to suddenly recognize Emma's worth or start treating her with the consideration she deserved. He was comfortable with the status quo, and no amount of reasoning or pleading was going to alter his priorities. But the conversation had also revealed something else. He was aware of his choices. The careful way he'd defended his behavior, the quick deflections when I'd presented evidence, the calculated language he'd used to minimize Emma's importance, all of it proved that his neglect was intentional. He wasn't a confused old man who'd forgotten about his granddaughter. He was a man who'd decided that some grandchildren were worth more effort than others, and Emma had been placed in the less effort category. That afternoon, when I picked Emma up from Sarah's house, she was bubbling with excitement about her playdate and full of stories about the games she'd played and the snacks she'd eaten. She chattered happily in her car seat during the drive home, her voice bright with the uncomplicated joy that only children can maintain. "Mommy, can we call Grandpa Richard tonight and tell him about my new art set? I made him a picture of a Christmas tree with his favorite colors." "How do you know what his favorite colors are, sweetheart?" "Blue and green, because that's what he wears in all the pictures on Aunt Rebecca's fridge. I wanted to make him something special, so maybe he'll want to visit us soon." My heart broke a little more. Emma was still trying to earn her grandfather's love, still believing that if she just did the right thing or made the perfect gift, she could change his mind about her importance. That's a beautiful thought, baby. But you know what? You don't need to make special things to earn love. People who love you will love you no matter what, just because of who you are. "I know that," she said seriously. "But sometimes people forget how much they love you if they don't see you very much. So I thought maybe if I reminded Grandpa Richard with a pretty picture, he would remember." That night, after Emma was asleep, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. I was going to stop facilitating a relationship between Emma and her grandfather that only caused her confusion and pain. I was going to stop making excuses for his behavior and start protecting her from it. But I wasn't going to do it quietly, and I wasn't going to do it in a way that let him off the hook for his choices. If Richard Thompson wanted to be a grandfather to 4 of his 5 grandchildren, that was his prerogative. But he was going to have to own that decision publicly, and he was going to have to live with the consequences. I opened my laptop and began typing an email that would change everything. The email I wrote that night took me 3 hours and 17 drafts. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it in a way that left no room for misinterpretation, deflection, or future claims that I'd been emotional or unreasonable. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. Emma had been asleep for hours, the house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heater, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at an email that would fundamentally change the dynamics of my family. The subject line was simple, regarding Emma's place in the family. The email itself was longer than anything I'd ever written to my father, but every word was deliberate. "Dad, after our conversation today, I've been thinking about the situation with Emma and her relationship with you. I want to be clear about what I observed during Emma's first 5 years of life, so there's no confusion about why I'm making the decisions I'm about to make. Since Emma was born, you have attended 0 of her birthday parties, while attending all birthday parties for Tyler, Connor, Madison, and Sophia, visited our home twice in 5 years, while visiting Marcus monthly and Rebecca bi-weekly, called Emma on her birthday twice out of 5 years, while calling all other grandchildren on their birthdays without fail. This pattern is not accidental, and it's not accidental. It's about choices. You've chosen to prioritize 4 of your 5 grandchildren, while treating Emma as an afterthought. Today you told me that Emma doesn't need additional complications in her life, referring to your own presence as her grandfather. You suggested that my independence means Emma requires less attention and support than her cousins. You implied that a 5-year-old should understand family dynamics that excuse unequal treatment. I want you to understand what your choices have created. A little girl who believes she must have done something wrong to make her grandfather forget about her. A child who makes you pictures hoping to earn your love. A 5-year-old who watches her cousins receive attention, gifts, and experiences from you while wondering why she's not worth the same effort. This ends now. I will no longer facilitate a relationship between you and Emma that only serves to teach her that love is conditional and inconsistent. I will no longer make excuses to her about why you don't call, visit, or remember her. I will no longer pretend that your neglect is acceptable because it's been consistent. If you would like to have a meaningful relationship with Emma, one that involves the same level of time, attention, and effort you provide to her cousins, I am open to that conversation, but I will not accept half-hearted attempts or token gestures designed to manage your guilt rather than honor her worth. Emma deserves a grandfather who shows up for her life, not one who treats her like a distant obligation. If you're not willing to be that grandfather, then please have the integrity to admit it, rather than continuing to disappoint her. I'm copying Marcus and Rebecca on this email because your favoritism affects the entire family dynamic, and because they deserve to understand why Emma will no longer be participating in family events where she's treated as less important than her cousins. Jessica. I stared at the screen for another 20 minutes, my finger hovering over the send button. Once I sent this email, there would be no going back. No more polite family dinners where we all pretended everything was fine. No more making excuses for my father's behavior. No more protecting everyone else's comfort at Emma's expense. But as I sat there in the quiet darkness of my kitchen, I thought about Emma's face when she'd asked if she'd done something wrong. I thought about her careful arrangement of colored pencils as she made a picture for a grandfather who couldn't be bothered to remember her address. I thought about the kind of woman I wanted her to become, and the lessons I was teaching her about accepting less than she deserved. I clicked send. The response came faster than I'd expected. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with text messages from Rebecca and Marcus, both of whom had apparently been awake when my email arrived in their inboxes. Rebecca's text arrived first. Jess, can we talk? This email, there's a lot to unpack here. Followed immediately by Marcus. What the hell is wrong with you? Did you really just attack Dad in an email and copy the whole family? This is incredibly inappropriate. I turned off my phone without responding to either of them. Tomorrow would bring phone calls, family drama, and pressure to apologize for speaking the truth. But tonight I wanted to sit with the relief of finally saying what needed to be said. The next morning, Emma woke up in her usual cheerful mood, completely unaware that I'd just blown up 32 years of family dysfunction on her behalf. She bounded into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and her favorite striped pajamas, immediately launching into a detailed explanation of the dream she'd had about flying horses. And then the purple horse said I could ride to the moon if I wanted to, but I told him I had to ask you first because that's very far away and you might worry, she concluded, climbing onto her chair at the breakfast table. That was very thoughtful of you to check with me first, I said, pouring orange juice into her cup. What did you tell the purple horse? I said maybe we could just fly around the neighborhood instead, so you could watch from the yard and make sure I was safe. Even in her dreams, Emma was considerate of others, thinking about how her choices might affect the people who loved her. The contrast between her natural empathy and her grandfather's calculated indifference was stark. My phone had been buzzing all morning, but I'd left it upstairs, not ready to deal with the family fallout just yet. I wanted to have breakfast with Emma, help her get dressed, and maybe take her to the park before I faced the consequences of my email. But around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Rebecca standing on my porch, holding a coffee cup and looking like she hadn't slept much. She was alone, which surprised me. I'd expected Marcus to show up first, ready to lecture me about family loyalty and appropriate communication. Emma, sweetheart, can you play in your room for a few minutes while Aunt Rebecca and I talk? Emma looked up from the puzzle she was working on, glanced toward the door, and nodded solemnly. Is Aunt Rebecca upset about something? She looked sad through the window. The fact that my 5-year-old could read Rebecca's emotional state from across the room while our father couldn't be bothered to notice Emma's confusion and hurt said everything about emotional intelligence and empathy. Aunt Rebecca and I just need to have a grown-up conversation, I said. You're not in trouble and neither is she. We just need to talk about some family stuff. Emma accepted this explanation and headed upstairs with her puzzle pieces, singing quietly to herself as she climbed the steps. I opened the door, and Rebecca immediately stepped inside, her face a mixture of exhaustion and something that might have been relief. I've been driving around for 2 hours trying to figure out what to say to you, she said without preamble. I must have started and deleted 20 text messages. Rebecca, if you're here to ask me to apologize, I'm not. She set her coffee cup on my kitchen counter and turned to face me. I'm here because I read your email about 6 times last night, and I kept thinking about Christmas morning with the twins. I waited for her to continue. Madison asked me yesterday why Emma doesn't get to go fishing with Grandpa like Tyler does. And when I tried to explain that different families do different things, she said, but they're both our cousins, why doesn't Grandpa love Emma the same way? Rebecca's voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. What did you tell her? I told her that Grandpa loves all his grandchildren, but that some relationships are different because of where people live. And she looked at me with this incredibly serious expression and said, "That doesn't sound fair." I could picture the conversation perfectly. Madison, with her 6-year-old sense of justice, cutting through all the adult rationalizations to the heart of the matter. "She's not wrong," I said quietly. "No, she's not. And neither are you." Rebecca sat down heavily at my kitchen table. "Jess, I've been thinking about this for years, but I kept telling myself it wasn't my business, that Dad's relationship with each grandchild was between him and that child's parents. But watching Madison and Sophia try to understand why their cousin gets treated differently, it's making me see things I've been ignoring." "Like what?" "Like the fact that Dad has never once asked me how Emma is doing when we talk on the phone. He asks about David's work, the twins' school, my job, our house renovations, but never about Emma, and when I bring her up, he changes the subject so quickly that I barely notice it's happening." Rebecca paused, staring down at her hands. "And like the fact that when Marcus and I plan family gatherings, we automatically assume Emma won't be included, because Dad never asks about her schedule or whether you're available. We've been unconsciously planning around his favoritism for so long that we don't even question it anymore." This was the first time in our adult lives that Rebecca had acknowledged the inequality in how our father treated his children and grandchildren. For 32 years, she'd been protected by her favored status from having to see the damage his preferences created. "What changed?" I asked. "Watching my daughters notice it. Watching them ask questions I couldn't answer, without admitting that their grandfather treats people differently, based on some criteria that has nothing to do with love or worth. Realizing that if I keep making excuses for him, I'm teaching Madison and Sophia that favoritism is normal and acceptable." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't want my daughters to grow up thinking that some people matter more than others, and I don't want them to watch Emma being excluded without understanding that it's wrong." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your email was completely justified. I'm saying that Dad's behavior toward Emma has been unacceptable for years, and I've been complicit in it by not speaking up. And I'm saying that if Dad can't treat all his grandchildren equally, then maybe it's time for the rest of us to stop pretending that's okay." I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tight. For the first time since Emma was born, someone in my family was acknowledging that my father's treatment of her was wrong. Someone was seeing what I'd been seeing and validating my concerns instead of minimizing them. "What about Marcus?" I asked. Rebecca's expression darkened slightly. "Marcus is Marcus. He's defensive because Dad's favoritism has always benefited him and his boys. He called me this morning and spent 20 minutes telling me that you were being overly emotional and that Dad's just old-fashioned about family relationships." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that if being old-fashioned means forgetting about your granddaughter's existence, then maybe it's time to modernize." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Rebecca had always been diplomatic to a fault, so hearing her speak this directly about our father's behavior was both surprising and encouraging. "How did that go over?" "About as well as you'd expect. He said I was letting you manipulate me into taking sides, and that families are complicated and we all need to be more understanding of Dad's limitations." "His limitations?" "That's exactly what I said. What limitations?" "He manages to remember Tyler's baseball schedule and Connor's school events. He manages to visit regularly and call consistently when it comes to the grandchildren he prioritizes. His limitations seem very selective." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the conversation and its implications. "Rebecca," I said finally, "I need you to understand that I'm serious about protecting Emma from this dynamic. I'm not going to bring her to family events where she's treated as less important than her cousins. I'm not going to keep making excuses for Dad's behavior. And I'm not going to pretend everything is fine just to keep the peace. I know, and I think you're right to protect her." Rebecca stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Emma and I had built a snowman the day before. "I've been thinking about what kind of example I want to set for Madison and Sophia. What kind of values I want them to learn about family and fairness and standing up for people who are being treated badly." She turned back to me. "I don't want them to learn that you stay quiet when you see injustice, even if speaking up is uncomfortable. I don't want them to think that keeping peace is more important than protecting people you love. So what are you gonna do? I'm gonna have a conversation with Dad. A real conversation, where I tell him that his treatment of Emma is unacceptable and that it's affecting how I feel about bringing my own daughters around him. I'm gonna tell him that favoritism isn't a family value I want to pass down to the next generation. And if he doesn't change? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her working through the implications of taking a stand. Then I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I can't keep pretending this is okay just because it's easier than confronting him. After Rebecca left, I sat in my living room feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. The knowledge that someone in my family was finally willing to stand up for Emma and for what was right. The isolation I'd felt for so long was beginning to crack, replaced by the possibility that change might actually be possible. But I also knew that the hardest conversations were still ahead. My father wouldn't respond well to being confronted by multiple children about his favoritism. Marcus would likely escalate his defense of the status quo. And somewhere in the middle of all this family drama was Emma, who deserved to be protected from the chaos, while still understanding that she was worth fighting for. The war for Emma's place in this family was just beginning. The phone call from Marcus came at 7:23 p.m. on December 28th, right in the middle of Emma's bath time. I almost didn't answer it. Emma was in full storytelling mode, creating elaborate adventures for her bath toys that required my complete attention and frequent dramatic gasps of surprise. But the phone kept ringing, and something about the persistence made me think it might be important. Emma, sweetheart, keep playing with your mermaids for just a minute while Mommy answers the phone, okay? She nodded solemnly, already deep in conversation with a plastic dolphin about underwater kingdoms and secret treasures. Jessica, we need to talk. Marcus's voice was tight, with barely controlled anger. This situation you've created with your email is getting completely out of hand. What situation is that, Marcus? Don't play dumb. Dad called me this morning, completely upset about your accusations. Rebecca apparently called him yesterday and basically repeated everything you said in that email. Now he's talking about not attending Tyler's birthday party next month because he doesn't want to deal with more family drama. I felt a cold spike of anger. So Dad is willing to punish Tyler for my honesty about how he treats Emma? That's not what's happening here, and you know it. Dad is hurt and confused about why you're suddenly attacking him over something as minor as a Christmas present. He's an old man, Jess. He doesn't understand why you're making such a big deal out of what was obviously just an oversight. Marcus, did you read my email? The part where I listed 5 years of patterns? This isn't about one Christmas present. I read your email. It was a petty accounting of every perceived slight over the years. Written like you were building a legal case instead of talking to your father. It was harsh and unnecessary. What would have been necessary, in your opinion? A private conversation. A phone call where you explained your concerns without attacking his character or copying the entire family. Some basic respect for the man who raised you. I closed my eyes, listening to Emma's cheerful chatter from the bathroom, and tried to keep my voice level. I did have a private conversation with him, Marcus. The day after Christmas. He dismissed Emma's feelings, defended his favoritism, and made it clear he had no intention of changing his behavior. So your solution was to publicly humiliate him? My solution was to stop protecting him from the consequences of his choices. My solution was to prioritize my daughter's emotional well-being over everyone else's comfort. By threatening to cut off contact? By telling him he's a bad grandfather? By making Rebecca feel guilty for having a good relationship with Dad? That last comment caught my attention. What did Rebecca say to you? There was a pause, and I could practically hear Marcus recalibrating his approach. She called me yesterday after she visited you. She's all worked up now, talking about how Dad needs to change his behavior with Emma. How she can't explain the favoritism to Madison and Sophia. You've got her questioning everything about Dad's relationships with all the grandchildren. Good. Maybe she should question it. Maybe we all should have been questioning it years ago. Rebecca has a good relationship with Dad, Jess. Her daughters love their grandfather, and he's been incredibly supportive of her family. Why would you want to damage that? I don't want to damage anything. I want Dad to extend the same support and love to Emma that he gives to Rebecca's daughters. I want all his grandchildren to feel equally valued. That's not realistic, and you know it. Different relationships develop differently. Dad connects better with some kids than others. That's normal. You can't force emotional connections. I'm not trying to force emotional connections, Marcus. I'm trying to ensure basic fairness in how he treats his grandchildren. Phone calls on birthdays. Christmas presents that arrive on time. Occasional visits. These aren't unreasonable expectations. Look, maybe Dad could make more of an effort with Emma. I'm not saying the situation is perfect. But you went nuclear without trying to work things out gradually. You demanded perfection instead of asking for improvement. I thought about this for a moment, wondering if Marcus might have a point. Had I been too harsh in my email? Too demanding in my expectations? Then I heard Emma singing softly in the bathroom, making up a song about lonely mermaids who just wanted their families to visit them in their underwater castle, and I remembered why I'd written that email in the first place. Marcus, Emma asked me if she did something wrong to make Grandpa forget about her. She's 5 years old, and she's already internalizing the message that she's not worth consistent love and attention. How much longer should I wait for gradual improvement while she learns to accept less than she deserves? Kids are resilient, Jess. Emma's not going to be damaged by having a less close relationship with her grandfather. You're projecting your own issues onto her situation. My own issues? Come on, you've always felt like Dad favored Rebecca and me. You've been carrying that resentment for years, and now you're using Emma's situation to finally have the confrontation you've wanted since childhood. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, partly because there was a grain of truth in it. I had been carrying resentment about my father's favoritism for years. I had felt overlooked and undervalued throughout my childhood and adulthood. But that didn't make my concerns about Emma invalid. If anything, my experience should have made Marcus more sympathetic to what his niece was going through. You're right, I said quietly. I have felt overlooked by Dad for most of my life. I've watched him prioritize you and Rebecca while treating me like an afterthought. And maybe that does make me more sensitive to seeing the same pattern with Emma. So you admit this is about your issues, not hers? No, Marcus. I admit that my experience helps me recognize what's happening to Emma. I admit that watching my father treat my daughter the same way he treated me makes me angry. But Emma's hurt feelings are real, regardless of my history with Dad. Look, what do you want me to do here? You've already sent your email, Rebecca is already stirring things up with Dad, and now we're looking at potential family fractures over what should have been a simple conversation about gift giving. I want you to consider the possibility that I'm right, that Dad has been treating Emma unfairly, and that it's affecting her emotional well-being. I want you to think about whether protecting Dad's feelings is more important than protecting Emma's. I think Dad is a good man who loves all his grandchildren, even if he shows it differently. I think you're expecting him to change personality traits that have been consistent for 73 years. And I think you're willing to blow up family relationships over something that could be solved with better communication and lower expectations. After Marcus and I hung up, the conversation ending with mutual frustration and no resolution, I sat on the edge of the bathtub watching Emma play with her toys. She'd moved on from mermaids to space adventures, with rubber ducks serving as astronauts exploring distant planets made of soap bubbles. "Mommy, are you sad about something?" she asked, looking up at me with those perceptive blue eyes that missed nothing. "I'm just thinking about grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about Grandpa Richard? I heard you saying his name on the phone." I should have been more careful about where I took Marcus's call, but Emma's ability to pick up on emotional undercurrents never ceased to amaze me. "Some of it is about Grandpa Richard, yes. But it's not your job to worry about that, okay? That's grown-up business." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, but if Grandpa Richard is making you sad, maybe I should make him a different picture. Maybe the Christmas tree one wasn't good enough." And there it was again, Emma's instinctive response to assume that she needed to do something better, try something harder, be something more to earn the love and attention she deserved. "Emma, look at me." I knelt beside the bathtub so we were at eye level. "You don't need to make Grandpa Richard any pictures. You don't need to do anything special or different to earn love from people. Love isn't something you have to work for or prove you deserve. But if people forget about you, maybe they need reminders about how much you love them. Sweetheart, people who truly love you don't forget about you. They remember you because you're important to them, not because you send them reminders. She absorbed this information with the seriousness of someone much older than 5, then went back to her space adventure. But I could see her processing what I'd said, trying to reconcile it with her experience of being forgotten by her grandfather. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I found myself doing something I'd never done before, researching family therapists who specialized in grandparent-grandchild relationships. Not because I thought therapy would fix my father's behavior, but because I wanted to understand how to help Emma process the situation in healthy ways. The articles I found were enlightening and heartbreaking in equal measure. Studies showing that children who experienced favoritism from grandparents often struggled with self-worth issues that persisted into adulthood. Research indicating that inconsistent attention from extended family members could create attachment difficulties and relationship problems later in life. But there were also articles about resilience, about how children could thrive when they had strong primary relationships even if secondary relationships were disappointing. Stories about kids who'd grown up with absent or inconsistent grandparents, but developed healthy relationship patterns because their parents had modeled consistent love and support. The key, according to multiple sources, was honesty. Children needed age-appropriate explanations for why some family relationships were different than others. They needed to understand that inconsistent treatment from adults reflected the adults' limitations, not the children's worth. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Just got off the phone with Dad. Need to talk to you tomorrow. It's not good news." I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what not good news meant in the context of an already fractured family situation. Had my father decided to cut off contact entirely? Had he become even more defensive and entrenched in his favoritism? Had Rebecca changed her mind about supporting me after pressure from Marcus and our father? But as I got ready for bed, I realized that I felt calmer than I had in years. Not because the situation was resolved, it clearly wasn't, but because I'd finally stopped pretending that everything was fine. I'd stopped protecting other people's comfort at Emma's expense. I'd stopped making excuses for behavior that was harmful to my daughter. Whatever not good news Rebecca had to share, at least it would be honest. At least we'd be dealing with reality instead of polite fiction. At least Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had been willing to fight for her, even when that fight was complicated and messy and uncertain. The next morning, Emma woke up early and climbed into my bed, snuggling against my side with the casual affection that made every difficult adult conversation worth having. "Mommy, I had a dream about the space ducks again," she said sleepily. "They found a new planet where all the families visit each other all the time, and no one ever forgets anyone's address." I held her closer, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo and feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. "That sounds like a very nice planet," I said. "Yeah, and guess what? On that planet, all the grandpas remember to call on birthdays, and all the kids get presents that arrive on time." Even in her dreams, Emma was working through the disappointment of being forgotten. Even in her sleep, she was imagining a world where love was consistent and fair. I kissed the top of her head and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whatever family fractures resulted, Emma would grow up knowing that she deserved that kind of world. And if the adults in her life couldn't provide it, at least she'd know that her mother had been willing to demand it on her behalf. The phone call from Rebecca would come in a few hours, bringing whatever complications my father's response had created. But right now, in the quiet morning light with Emma warm and safe in my arms, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The peace that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when the right thing is hard. Emma deserved a family that showed up for her consistently. If our current family couldn't provide that, then maybe it was time to redefine what family meant. Rebecca's call came at 9:15 a.m. while Emma was at the kitchen table, carefully arranging her new colored pencils by shade intensity, a project that had been occupying her attention for the past 20 minutes, with the focused dedication that only children can bring to tasks adults would consider mundane. "I need to tell you what Dad said," Rebecca began without preamble, "and I need to tell you what I decided to do about it." I stepped into the hallway, keeping Emma in sight but ensuring she couldn't overhear the conversation. "How bad is it?" "He's furious. Not just defensive or hurt. Actually angry in a way I've never seen before. He spent the first 10 minutes of our conversation telling me that you've always been ungrateful and dramatic. that you're using Emma to get attention, and that he's done trying to maintain a relationship with someone who clearly doesn't appreciate his efforts. I felt my stomach clench. And I told him that I've been watching his interactions with all the grandchildren for years, and that your email was completely accurate. I told him that if he could drive 4 hours to Tyler's baseball games, he could drive 6 hours to see Emma. I told him that forgetting addresses and claiming to be too busy are excuses, not reasons. How did he respond to that? Rebecca's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying emotion. He told me that I was being manipulated by your jealousy, that I didn't understand the complexities of managing relationships with 5 grandchildren, and that if I couldn't see the difference between his boys and Emma, then maybe I was as unreasonable as you are. His boys? That's what he said. Tyler and Connor are his boys. Madison and Sophia are his girls. But Emma was just that child, or Jessica's daughter, like she's not actually part of the family. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Even in his anger, my father was making it clear that Emma occupied a different category in his mind. Not granddaughter, just Jessica's daughter. What did you say to that? I said that Emma is his granddaughter, just like Tyler and Connor and Madison and Sophia. I said that if he can't see her that way, then maybe the problem isn't with your expectations, it's with his capacity for love. I was quiet for a moment, processing the fact that Rebecca had been willing to confront our father so directly. For 32 years she'd been his favored daughter, protected from his disappointment and criticism. Standing up to him meant risking that privileged position. And then what happened? He hung up on me, just hung up in the middle of the conversation. I'm sorry, Rebecca, I never wanted to damage your relationship with him. You didn't damage anything, Jess. You exposed something that was already broken. And honestly, I'm not sure I want a relationship with someone who can dismiss his own granddaughter so casually. I heard Emma calling from the kitchen, asking if she could start drawing with her new art supplies, and I waved to let her know it was okay. So what now? I asked Rebecca. Now I do something I should have done years ago. I stop making excuses for him. I stop bringing Madison and Sophia around someone who teaches them that love is conditional. And I support you in protecting Emma from this toxicity. What about family gatherings? Holidays? We'll make our own traditions, better ones. Ones where all the children are treated equally and loved unconditionally. After Rebecca and I finished talking, I sat at my kitchen table watching Emma work on her latest artistic creation. Elaborate drawing of a house with multiple rooms, each one labeled with careful 5-year-old handwriting. Mommy's room, Emma's room, guest room for friends, playroom, Grandma Carol's room. Who's going to stay in Grandma Carol's room? I asked. Grandma Carol, when she comes to visit next month, and maybe Sarah if she wants to have sleepovers, and maybe other people who want to visit us and remember our address. That last comment was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone that children use when they're processing adult situations they don't fully understand. Emma had clearly been thinking about addresses and forgetting and the mechanics of how people show up for each other. That sounds like a very welcoming house, I said. Yeah, in my house everyone who wants to visit is allowed to visit, and no one forgets about anyone. I studied her drawing more carefully and noticed that she'd left one room unlabeled, a small space near the back of the house, drawn with lighter pencil strokes than the rest. What about this room here? Emma looked at the space I was pointing to, then picked up her eraser and carefully rubbed it out completely. That was going to be for Grandpa Richard, she said simply, but I changed my mind. He probably wouldn't want to stay in a room where he might forget his way home. The casual way she dismissed the space she'd made for her grandfather, not angry, not hurt, just practical, told me everything I needed to know about how she was processing the situation. Emma was protecting herself in the only way a 5-year-old knew how, by adjusting her expectations to match reality. Emma, sweetheart, can I tell you something important? She looked up from her drawing, giving me her full attention in the way children do when they sense a serious conversation coming. Grandpa Richard's choice not to visit us or call us regularly isn't about you. It's not because you did anything wrong, and it's not because you're not wonderful enough to deserve his attention. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, even to other adults. I know that, she said seriously. You told me that before. But I want to make sure you really know it. Because sometimes when people we love don't show up for us the way we want them to, we start thinking it's our fault. And it's never your fault when someone else chooses not to love you the way you deserve. Emma considered this for a moment, then nodded. Like how it's not the purple horse's fault if someone doesn't want to ride to the moon with them? Exactly like that. She went back to her drawing, adding windows to each room and carefully coloring them in with yellow pencil to show that lights were on inside. Mommy, are you sad that Grandpa Richard doesn't want to visit our house? I thought about how to answer honestly without burdening her with my own complicated feelings about my father's rejection. I'm sad that he's missing out on knowing how amazing you are, I said. I'm sad that he doesn't get to hear your stories or see your drawings or watch you grow up, but I'm not sad about protecting you from someone who doesn't appreciate how special you are. So we're not going to try to make him love us anymore? The question was asked with such innocent directness that it took my breath away. Because yes, that's exactly what we'd been doing for 5 years. Trying to make Richard Thompson love Emma the way he loved her cousins. Sending pictures and updates and invitations, hoping that eventually he'd recognize her worth. Making excuses for his neglect, and teaching Emma to accept less than she deserved. No, sweetheart, we're not going to try to make anyone love us anymore. We're going to focus on the people who already do love us, and who show us that love in ways we can see and feel. Like you and Sarah and Grandma Carol? Exactly like that. Emma smiled and went back to her drawing, adding flowers around the house and a big sun in the corner. Her house looked warm and welcoming and full of life. Exactly the kind of place where a little girl should feel safe and valued. That afternoon, while Emma napped, I received an unexpected phone call from my father. I almost didn't answer it, but curiosity got the better of me. Jessica, I think we need to clear the air about this situation, he said without any greeting or pleasantries. I'm listening. I want you to know that I've always cared about Emma. Perhaps I haven't expressed it in ways that meet your expectations, but that doesn't mean the care isn't there. Dad, caring about someone isn't just a feeling, it's actions. It's showing up, remembering birthdays, making time for phone calls. Emma can't feel your unexpressed care. I'm an old man, Jessica. I don't have unlimited energy or resources. I've done my best to maintain relationships with all my grandchildren within my capabilities. But your capabilities seem to vary dramatically depending on which grandchild we're talking about. You have unlimited energy for Tyler's baseball games and Connor's school events. You have unlimited resources for Madison and Sophia's dance recitals and birthday parties. Those situations are different. How? There was a long pause, and I could practically hear him trying to find a way to explain his favoritism without admitting to it. Marcus and Rebecca have always needed more support with their children. You've always been self-sufficient. Dad, Emma is 5 years old. She's not self-sufficient. She's a little girl who wants her grandfather to know her and love her and show up for her life. I never said I didn't love her. But you've never shown her that you do, and showing love is what matters to children. Another pause. Then, what do you want from me, Jessica, specifically? I thought about this question for a moment. A week ago, I would have given him a detailed list of changes I wanted to see. Regular phone calls, visits, thoughtful gifts, attendance at important events. But now, after watching Emma erase the room she'd drawn for him, after seeing how she was already protecting herself from his indifference, I realized that my wants had shifted. I want you to be honest, I said. If you're not willing or able to be an active, consistent grandfather to Emma, then I want you to admit that. Stop making excuses about forgotten addresses and busy schedules. Stop pretending that your neglect is accidental. And if I admit that, what then? Then Emma and I will build our lives around the people who are willing to show up for us. We'll stop waiting for you to change, and we'll stop making excuses for why you don't. You're talking about cutting off contact. I'm talking about protecting Emma from the confusion and hurt of inconsistent love. I'm talking about teaching her that she deserves better than someone who treats her as an afterthought. I see. His voice was cold now, formal. And you're comfortable with Emma growing up without her grandfather in her life? I'm comfortable with Emma growing up without someone in her life who makes her question her own worth. If that someone happens to be her grandfather, then yes, I'm comfortable with that choice. We ended the conversation without resolution, which was exactly what I'd expected. My father wasn't going to suddenly transform into the grandfather Emma deserved. He wasn't going to apologize for years of neglect or commit to changing his behavior. He was going to continue being exactly who he'd always been, someone who loved conditionally and selectively. But that was okay, because I wasn't the same person I'd been a week ago. I was no longer willing to accept less on Emma's behalf. I was no longer interested in managing other people's comfort at my daughter's expense. That evening, as Emma and I made dinner together, she was in charge of stirring the pasta while I handled the sauce. She looked up at me with those perceptive blue eyes and said, "Mommy, I think our family is just the right size." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean you and me and Sarah and Grandma Carol and all the people who remember our address and want to visit our house. That's a good family." She was right. We had a good family, chosen family, intentional family, family built on love and consistency and mutual care. Emma was surrounded by people who showed up for her, who remembered her birthday, who asked about her day, and cared about her answers. 6 months later, Emma started kindergarten. She came home on the first day, full of stories about her new teacher and the friends she'd made and the art project they'd worked on. When I asked if she wanted to call anyone to share her exciting news, she immediately suggested Sarah and Grandma Carol. She didn't mention her grandfather, not because she was angry or hurt, but because he'd simply become irrelevant to her daily life. She'd built her world around people who participated in it consistently, and she was thriving. A year after that Christmas, when everything changed, Emma is 6 years old, confident, and surrounded by love. She draws pictures of houses with clearly labeled rooms for all the people who matter to her. She makes up songs about families who show up for each other. She builds snowmen with neighbors who ask about her school projects and remember her favorite colors. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting off contact with my father, if I worry that Emma is missing out on having a grandfather. The answer is simple. Emma isn't missing out on anything. She has grandparents. Grandma Carol treats her like the treasure she is. She has extended family. Sarah's siblings have become honorary aunts and uncles. She has community. Teachers and neighbors and friends' parents who know her name and celebrate her milestones. What Emma doesn't have is the confusion of trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it consistently. She doesn't have the pain of being forgotten by someone who's supposed to prioritize her. She doesn't have the lesson that some people matter more than others. Rebecca visits us regularly now, and Madison and Sophia have become close friends with Emma. They understand that their grandfather made choices that hurt their cousin, and they've learned from their mother that love should be consistent and fair. Marcus still believes I overreacted, but his opinion has become as irrelevant as my father's neglect. The house Emma drew that day after Christmas, the one with rooms for everyone who wanted to visit and remembered our address, turned out to be prophetic. Our home has become a gathering place for people who understand that family is built through intentional love, not accidental biology. Emma is learning that she deserves to be chosen, prioritized, and celebrated. She's learning that love is something you can see and feel, not something you have to earn or prove you deserve. She's learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself from people who can't love you the way you need to be loved. And I'm learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop accepting less than you deserve, not just for yourself, but for the people you love most. Emma deserved a grandfather who showed up for her life. When it became clear that wasn't going to happen, she deserved a mother who was willing to protect her from the pain of that absence. In the end, that's exactly what she got. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.